Have you ever sat alone in the dark, truly, utterly alone, and felt a presence? Not a ghostly apparition, nothing so cliché, just a subtle shift in the air, a feeling that the emptiness around you is watching. It's a primal fear, one we dismiss as our minds playing tricks on us in the absence of light. But I know better, because one night during a city-wide blackout, the darkness in my own home stopped being empty. The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless, drumming tattoo on the roof of my old two-story house. It was the kind of storm that felt like a living thing, wrapping itself around the neighborhood, muffling the world in a gray, watery shroud. I'd always found the sound comforting, a perfect excuse to curl up with a book and a warm mug of tea. And that's exactly what I was doing when the lights flickered once, twice, and then surrendered completely. A deep, profound darkness swallowed the room whole. The only light was the cold, bluish glow of my phone screen, which I'd instinctively grabbed. A quick check confirmed it. A massive power outage affecting my entire sector of the city. Estimated time of restoration? Unknown. I sighed, a little annoyed, but mostly unbothered. There was something almost romantic about a blackout. It was a forced disconnect from the noisy, glaring world. I lit a few candles, their small, dancing flames casting long, distorted shadows that writhed on the walls like tormented spirits. The house which I had lived in for 3 years suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every corner seemed deeper, every piece of furniture a looming monolith. The usual hum of the refrigerator was gone, replaced by a silence so absolute that the sound of the rain outside seemed to amplify tenfold.
I must have been sitting there for nearly an hour when I first heard it. It was faint, almost lost beneath the deluge outside. A soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. At first, I dismissed it. It was an old house, after all. A loose shutter, maybe. But the sound persisted, a subtle but insistent beat beneath the chaos of the rain. It was regular, too regular to be a branch swaying in the wind, and it sounded internal. It was coming from inside the house. My heart gave a little kick against my ribs. The sound seemed to be coming from upstairs. Holding the candle aloft, I started for the stairs, the darkness at the top of the landing looking like a physical barrier. Each step I took seemed to echo the sound from above, my footfall. Thump. The noise from upstairs. Thump. It was as if the house and I were breathing in unison, a slow, terrifying rhythm leading me towards an answer I was suddenly terrified to find.
The staircase was a tunnel of moving shadows. The rhythmic thumping grew louder with each step. It was definitely coming from the end of the hallway, from the spare bedroom. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The spare bedroom was my storage space, a chaotic graveyard of things I didn't have a place for. I kept the door closed at all times. Always. When I reached the door, my hand, slick with sweat, reached for the old brass knob. I turned the knob, slowly, and the door swung inward. It wasn't locked. It wasn't even latched. It was slightly ajar. A sliver of perfect, impenetrable blackness greeted me, and the moment the door moved, the thumping stopped. The sudden, absolute silence that rushed in to fill the void was somehow more terrifying than the noise itself. The air that seeped from the room was stale and cold, carrying a faint, musty odor like damp soil. I raised the candle, pushing the door open further. The light spilled into the room, illuminating a chaotic landscape of shapes draped in white dust cloths. They looked like a silent congregation of ghosts. My gaze was drawn to a heavy, dark oak wardrobe against the far wall. Its door was also slightly ajar, a vertical line of deeper black against its dark wood. The thumping had come from this direction. I held my breath, listening, but there was nothing. Only the roar of the rain and the frantic, panicked drumming of my own heart. The source of the noise had vanished the second I opened the door, as if it had been waiting for me. And now, it was waiting for my next move.
Have you ever worked the late shift, the really late one, where the world outside your window goes quiet and the building around you seems to exhale, settling into its own private night? You feel like the last person on Earth. But what if you're not? What if the silence is just a curtain, and behind it, something is patiently waiting for everyone else to leave? I used to love that solitude, until the night I realized the building wasn't settling, it was listening. For 2 years, I worked as a graphic designer for a mid-sized marketing firm. Our office was on the 7th floor of a 12-story building that was sleek and modern on the outside, but always felt cold on the inside. It was one of those places with motion-activated lights in the hallways and bathrooms. I was a night owl by nature, so I'd frequently stay late, long after my colleagues had departed. This particular night, it was around 11:30 p.m. I was the only one on the entire floor, possibly in the whole building, aside from the security guard Arthur, who was stationed in the main lobby, 7 floors below. I was deep in a project, tweaking the color palette on a new logo, when I felt a sudden, intense chill. I got up to stretch my legs and head to the kitchen for another cup of coffee. As I stepped out of my office, the hallway lights flickered on, one by one, illuminating the long, sterile corridor ahead of me. As I walked, I could hear my own footsteps echoing softly on the polished concrete floor. I reached the kitchen, a gleaming stainless steel affair at the far end of the floor. As the lights blinked on, I saw that everything was as it should be. I poured myself a coffee, the gurgling of the machine a welcome noise in the oppressive quiet. As I stood there, I glanced down the perpendicular hallway that led to the emergency exit and the restrooms, and I saw it. At the very end of the hall, the men's restroom door was propped open. Just a crack, a thin, vertical slice of complete and utter darkness. Now, that might not sound like much, but in our office, it was impossible. The restroom doors were fitted with heavy-duty hydraulic closers. They were designed to shut firmly every single time. Leaving it ajar wasn't something you could do by accident. It required a deliberate act. My first thought was the cleaning crew, but they always came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and this was a Wednesday. My next thought was far more unnerving. Arthur, the security guard,
but he never left the lobby. Every rational explanation I could conjure seemed to evaporate. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. "Is anyone there?" Only the hum of the building answered. Curiosity got the better of me. My sneakers were almost silent on the floor as I crept forward. The motion sensor above me suddenly clicked on, flooding the hallway with cold fluorescent light. I flinched, my eyes adjusting, and that's when I saw it. There was nothing holding the door open, no wedge, no object. It was just open, as if being held in place by an invisible hand. And from within the pitch-black darkness of the restroom, I heard a sound, a soft, wet, dragging noise, like a heavy, waterlogged blanket being slowly pulled across a tiled floor. It was a sound that had no business being there, and it sent a spike of pure, unadulterated ice through my veins. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn around, to run back to my office, grab my things, and leave. But I was frozen. My eyes locked on that sliver of darkness. It stopped, as suddenly as it started. And the silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced.
A car in a storm feels like a sanctuary, a little metal bubble keeping the world at bay. You feel safe. You feel in control. But what happens when that bubble pops? What happens when you're forced out into the storm, and the only light for miles is a single flickering sign that promises shelter, but feels like a warning? I was driving home from a client meeting on a 3-hour stretch of rural highway when the storm hit. Then my car sputtered and died. I was in the middle of nowhere, with no phone signal. I was stranded. That's when I saw it. Far down the highway, a sickly, buzzing, neon green light. A sign. It read, TEFLICKER Inn. The Flicker Inn. A fitting name. It was an old single-story motel, the kind that probably hadn't seen a paying customer in a decade. The place smelled of wet asphalt, decay, and something else. Something sweet and cloying, like rotting flowers. I pushed open the door to the office. A little bell, caked in rust, gave a dull, lifeless clank. The room was small and stuffy. Behind a wooden counter stood the oldest man I had ever seen, his skin like yellowed parchment. He just stared at me with pale, cloudy eyes. Broke down, I managed to say, my teeth chattering. Need a room, and a phone, if you have one. The old man didn't speak for a long moment. Then he slowly pushed a large leather-bound guest book across the counter, along with a skeleton key attached to a large plastic tag with the number 7 carved into it. "No phone," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Power's out. Cash only. No visitors, and don't lose the key." His words were flat, but the way he said "don't lose the key" felt less like advice and more like a threat. Before I left, he croaked, "One more thing. Don't mind the noise. The pipes are old. They gurgle." Room 7 was at the far end of the motel. The air in the room was heavy with the smell of mildew and disinfectant. I locked the door behind me, the heavy bolts sliding home with a satisfying thud, and collapsed onto the bed. It was in this silence that I first heard what the old man had called gurgling. It wasn't gurgling. It was a faint, rhythmic scratching from the room next door, room 8. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. I told myself it was a rat, but the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. Then it changed. The scratching stopped. I crept to the wall, my ear inches away. I heard a soft, shuffling noise, and then a new sound. Tap. 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 It was coming from the wall. A signal. Whatever was in that room knew I was here. I stumbled backward in a panic. I had to leave. I scrambled to the door and fumbled with the key to unlock it. It didn't move. It was jammed tight. It was locked in. The moment that realization hit me, a voice started from room 8. A low, guttural, wet whisper seeping through the wall. It was laughing. I lunged for the bathroom and locked myself inside. It was tiny and smelled of bleach and mold. For a minute, there was only silence. Then, a new sound began. Inside the bathroom, with me. A low gurgle. It was coming from the shower drain. A putrid smell, like rotting flowers, began to seep from under the shower curtain. My hand trembling, I pulled it back. The shower stall was empty, but a thick, black, oily liquid was bubbling up from the drain. As I stared, a long, pale, skeletal hand pulled itself out of the filth. Followed by another, and then a head. It had no features, just 2 dark holes for eyes and a lipless slit for a mouth. I threw a bar of soap at it and scrambled out of the bathroom, slamming the flimsy door. I could already hear it breaking through. I turned to the window, my last hope. I shattered the glass with my shoe and pulled myself through the opening, slicing my hands on the jagged edges. I fell onto the concrete outside, and I ran. I ran until the flicker-in was just a hateful memory, and I kept running until the first signs of dawn broke the horizon.
There is a unique kind of isolation that comes from being high above the world. In a fire lookout tower, you're in a glass box in the sky, a silent observer to the vast, untamed wilderness below. You watch the weather, you watch for smoke, and you listen to the silence. But on the nights when the power dies and the fog rolls in, you are no longer an observer. You are the only candle in a sea of darkness, and you learn very quickly that you are not just watching the forest. The forest is also watching you. My name is Ben, and for one summer I took a job as a fire lookout in the Okanagan National Forest. The tower, Lookout 9, was as remote as it gets. A 15-foot square room on top of a 100-foot steel scaffold. My only connection to the outside world was a battery-powered radio. The blackout started in late August. A storm of biblical proportions rolled in one afternoon. Just before dusk, my small solar-powered generator died. I was plunged into darkness. I made my 6 p.m. check-in with Sarah, the dispatcher. "All right," she'd said, her voice crackling with static. "You know the protocol. Radio silence unless it's an emergency. Stay safe up there, Skyman." And with that, I was alone. It was around midnight when I first heard it. It came through the radio, which I'd left on, the volume turned low. A faint, rhythmic clicking sound. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click, click. I leaned closer. It sounded like someone tapping their teeth. "This is Lookout 9. Is anyone on this channel?" I asked. The clicking stopped. About 20 minutes later, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Far below me, in the pitch-black, rain-swept forest, a light appeared. A single, small pinprick of white light where no flashlight should ever be. The light moved for a moment, then blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Blink, blink, blink. Pause. Blink, blink, blink. It was the exact same pattern as the clicking on the radio. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a signal. This was something else. Unofficial. Wrong. After a few minutes, the light below blinked out, and the radio, which had been silent, crackled to life again. It wasn't the clicking this time. It was a voice. Distorted, warped by static and something else, something unnatural. I could make out a single repeating phrase, spoken in a low, guttural whisper. "We see you in the box. Let us in the box." I recoiled from the radio. Then came the sound I had been dreading. It wasn't from the radio. It was from the tower itself, a loud, metallic scrape from below me, followed by a rhythmic clang, clang, clang. Something was climbing the stairs. No human being would even attempt to climb them. Clang, clang, clang. It was halfway up. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. I killed the lantern. The room was plunged into absolute darkness. I crawled to the trapdoor. The heavy deadbolt was my only defense. The clanging stopped. A soft, wet, sniffing noise came from right on the other side of the door. It was here.
Every homeowner with a basement knows the sound. That low mechanical groan of a sump pump kicking on during a storm. It's the sound of safety. But in the dead of a stormy night, during a city-wide blackout, the most terrifying sound in the world is the silence it leaves behind. I live in a century-old Victorian with a basement that took on water like a sinking ship. The storm that night was relentless. When the lights died, total blackout. For about 10 minutes, I could still hear the faint, reassuring chug, chug, chug of the sump pump. Then it stopped. The silence was thick with implication. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and headed for the basement door. The air that wafted up was cold and thick with the smell of damp earth and a stagnant pond water smell. The floor was already a shimmering black mirror of water, a good 2 inches deep. I navigated through the clutter, my sneakers splashing. As I swept the light from side to side, it caught something bobbing gently. It was pale and small, with what looked like fingers. My first thought was a child's doll. I pointed the beam directly at it, and the breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a doll. It was a hand, a human hand, disembodied and waxy, its skin pruned and white from the water. I stumbled backward. The water was rising faster now, pushing up from a cracked section of the concrete floor. And from that same spot, something else was rising.
It came up slowly, a pale, round shape breaking the surface. I saw the matted dark hair, the glint of a glass eye. It was a life-sized, articulated doll, unearthed by the flood. I let out a shaky breath of relief. It wasn't a corpse. It was just a doll. And that's when its head turned. It rotated on its neck with a series of soft, wet clicks. The glass eyes, which had been staring at the ceiling, swiveled in their sockets until they were fixed directly on me. The serene, painted-on smile was no longer serene. It was predatory. The doll's arms began to move. It wasn't floating anymore. It was swimming. And it was coming.
I finally found my legs. I turned and ran, splashing frantically through the now knee-deep water. I could hear it behind me, its limbs slicing through the water. I scrambled up the stairs, slammed the heavy oak door shut, and threw the deadbolt. I collapsed against the door, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a soft bump against the other side of the door. It was followed by a gentle, rhythmic scratching. I'm on the second floor of my house now. The power's still out. The storm is still raging. I know the water is still rising. It will fill the basement, and then it will start to climb the stairs. The storm locked me in here with it, and it's just waiting for the water to get high enough to come and get me.
The darkness of a blackout is a canvas. Our minds will paint our worst fears upon it. But sometimes there are things in the dark that are more than willing to paint their own picture. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, and whatever you do, don't let the lights go out.